1 year ago, I released the video that I think I'm the most proud of. A nearly 1 hour in-depth retrospective of the entire saga of the original Dawn of War. In my time as a young lad, I'd played it on and off, but this was the first time I'd seriously gotten into its campaign and expansions. And wow, did I have a blast. Created in the heyday of RTS and the prime years of Relic Entertainment, Dawn of War was and continues to be a fantastic game that's continually referenced and enjoyed by fans to this day. Secondarily, it was also one of the defining entries in Warhammer 40k's slowly but surely growing video game catalogue, and I don't think it would be wrong to say that it wouldn't be nearly as big as it is today without the help of Dawn of War. But while things were looking strong after 2 well-received expansions, Relic was in a tough spot. The daunting task of creating a sequel to what many would argue is already a perfect 40k strategy game, with fantastic gameplay and a near perfect depiction of the universe it was set in looming above them. But lucky for them, time was on their side, and another studio was ready to pick up the slack for the last expansion of Dawn of War, Soulstorm. After switching gears and putting their resources towards the newly minted Company of Heroes series, 2009 would herald Relic's return to the grim darkness of Warhammer 40,000. Relic had a history of breaking from tradition, for creating games outside the status quo. Even the original Dawn of War introduced a swath of concepts seldom seen in RTSs before it, and it's with this mindset that they set out to create Dawn of War 2, aiming for a game that was fresh and innovative, one that would move the genre forward and give players something totally new to sink their teeth into. Most critic reviews at the time were very positive, citing its innovations to the RTS genre, fantastic visuals, and intense action as reasons to pick up Relic's creation. Players weren't quite so enthusiastic, however, and while the sentiment overall was good, the number of people unhappy with its bold new direction was significant. And speaking anecdotally to friends, as well as hearing a ton of your own opinions, thanks to all those who commented by the way, from a modern day perspective it seems like that rift has only widened, leaving no one on the fence and everyone in one of 2 camps. The first being Dawn of War 2 is great, and the second being Dawn of War 2 isn't what it's cracked up to be. It's an interesting place for a game to be, so with all that being said, I'm going to take everything I know and have learned over the past 2 months of living and breathing Dawn of War 2 and try and reach a conclusion. Is it a great game? Is it a good sequel? Are the Blood Ravens honest thieving magpies? Watch on to find out. And lastly, before we continue, this video is here to primarily discuss the base game of Dawn of War 2. For reviews on the expansions, Chaos Rising and Retribution, those will come later. Check the description if you're watching this after the fact. If there's no link, it will be there once those videos have been released. Dawn of War 2 sees the continuation of the story of the Blood Ravens, a Space Marine chapter with a shrouded history, a knack for getting into big conflicts, and a penchant for liberating artifacts and items to their collection to aid in their infinite quest for knowledge. It's at the start of the game that we learn the Space Marine ending to Dark Crusade is canon, and following the bloody Kilrava campaign seen in Soulstorm, the Ravens are severely undermanned and are at risk of being completely wiped out once their recruiting worlds at
Subsector Aurelia
are put at risk by an onslaught of orcs. And like any good Blood Raven story, it's not long before other factions are involved, with the Eldar and the Tyranids soon bearing down on their position. Can these guys ever just have a nice, simple one-on-one conflict without other races getting involved? No? Okay, fair enough. With all 4 factions in play, the story becomes one of the Blood Ravens defending their home turf and fighting aliens on all fronts, with the threat of the Tyranid Hive Fleet consuming the entire sector being the primary driver of the narrative. It is a simple premise, but it's really all the game needs, and the small interactions woven throughout are what really carry the story. The Space Marine banter, if you can call it that, is intriguing and engaging. It's nice to see some returning characters too, and to glean more of their limited personality through the interactions between them and the new faces introduced here in the sequel. And while the Tyranids are basically just big dumb bad guys lacking morality and the ability to be reasoned with, they're an extremely threatening presence that looms over the whole campaign, basically entirely thanks to the fact that they're coming at you no matter what. There will be no reprieve unless they're defeated. However, while Dawn of War 2 does capture the 40k setting and universe fantastically, perhaps even better than the original game, I do feel that the actual atmosphere and vibe of the story itself doesn't match what's actually going on. This is very, very serious business. I've watched enough Luton videos to know that the Tyranids are horrifying and are absolutely no joke. Watching his videos about them is basically just reading about a horrible nightmare. Destroying their hive fleet is a near impossible task for the forces on hand, and if the Ravens lose
Subsector Aurelia.
it likely means the end of the line for their entire chapter. But the severity of this situation I feel isn't really covered well enough, and even though it's spoken of, you don't really get the feeling that things are really, really dire. It's like that they know they're going to win, that victory is inevitable. Though maybe that speaks to the undying strength of the Space Marines more than a lack of concern. There are a few moments that do shine through. This small cutscene in particular showing Thule inside his newly minted Dreadnought is particularly unsettling. I just wish there was more of it, more dread, more terror, more characterization that would allow you to really get invested. Because I don't really care about any of these guys because I don't know anything about them that's beyond the surface level. And they don't seem to be affected by the threats they face. Furthermore, the presentation style inhibits that already limited ability for investment. Dawn of War 1's more intimate cutscenes and presentation got you closer to the protagonists. Compared to the talking heads here, it's really something I did sorely miss. I mean, at least it's voiced well, and I always love hearing the guy who voiced every gruff military character in games released around 2010.
But the hives here on the ground will recover soon enough, and I can assure you that we will not last long.
But the delivery method is just bland. Most of the exposition and character interactions are through little talking heads or mission briefings, which aren't exactly enthralling. You do get some more traditionally styled ones occasionally, but they're fleeting and usually very, very short. I'll tell you, make the most of that fantastic intro cinematic, because it's the best you're going to get. The design of the campaign, however, is one of the game's biggest strong suits. It's a great mix of Soulstorm's planet-hopping escapades and the original's linear storytelling. You have overarching goals to reach throughout the game, but you choose how you want to get there, whether you want to complete side missions to level your squads and improve their loadouts first, or head straight through to the main ones. The choice is yours. It's liberating, mainly because of how the changes to Dawn of War 2's gameplay make it less of a strategy game and more of a tactics one, with many more added elements to keep it interesting and enhance that desire to keep playing, improve your team, and complete just one more mission. Your squads are led by the game's protagonists, and any 4 can be deployed on each mission. While the number of actual units you field is clearly much more limited than the original Dawn of War, it does lend to showing the actual strength of the individual Space Marines. But it also makes it feel less like an actual war. I guess they couldn't just rename the game to fit. Your Space Marine team's efficacy is based upon how you've leveled up and equipped them in the overworld map. Giving unique items and weapons will unlock new abilities and improve their overall combat skill. It's like every squad has a much more developed version of the war gear system in Dark Crusade and Soulstorm. Or you could imagine it as a strange hybrid of Mass Effect style leveling with an XCOM style gear game. Completing missions and powering up your squads is a really satisfying loop. Getting new abilities to obliterate your foes is always exhilarating, and who doesn't love getting the exact same gun except this one has a bigger number? And being the magpies that they are, your Bloodraven Space Marines will have no shortage of options thanks to them picking up basically every shiny thing they see in every mission. Plus, the very 40k names for all of your equipment are as over the top and hardcore as ever. The Armour of Victory, Chant of Resolve, Undying Silence, Herald of Graven Liturgy, Alchemist of the Sacred Crucible, Gladius of Tenacity, or the Envoy of Suffering. They're so hardcore that you probably can't tell which of those are real, which ones I made up, and which ones I got from a 40k name generator. But of course, all these changes are the big reason why Dawn of War 2 was so divisive amongst fans when it launched. And even though you might not think so by looking at reviews and discourse surrounding the game now, it still is for a lot of people. The level to which Dawn of War 2 sees a paradigm shift away from traditional RTS mechanics isn't exactly apparent until you play it, and experience all of what its changes actually amount to in the moment-to-moment gameplay. On the surface, it looks familiar, like a more streamlined version of the original, but I assure you, that is not the case. Almost all of the core features you remember from Dawn of War, and other RTSs of the time for that matter, are nowhere to be found. Base building, gone. Huge armies of units, gone. Tech trees, gone. And though some of these are available in a very limited capacity in Skirmish, We're just talking about the campaign for now, we'll get to that later. Each mission begins with your 4 chosen squads of Space Marines deploying planetside, and from there you are very limited in terms of reinforcement and strengthening your position. Each squad has unique abilities and fill a specific role. Cyrus leads your sniper team, Avitus a devastated marine squad, etc. Utilising your teams is a game of micromanaging. Unless you're playing on the easiest difficulties, don't think you can just right click enemies and win the game. There's cover to be utilised, abilities to be used, and equipment to manage. You really do need to be alert, and hotkeys are an absolute must. If you're caught sleeping, you can get overwhelmed and be on the back foot very quickly, which I was many times, of course. The abilities and equipment your Space Marines can utilise range from nice to haves to absolute crutches in times of need. For the former, you unlock new active and passive skills as they level up using the Mass Effect style leveling system I alluded to earlier, and the latter are equipped in slots that are specific for each class, so not everyone can use the same gear, though there is some overlap. It's a good way to force specialisations for your squads, which in turn makes losing key ones in battle quite the blow, thanks to the sheer power level of what you can do. Whether it's an artillery barrage, reviving down squads instantly, or calling in a drop pod that reinforces your squads while crushing anything under it to a pulp, a well-coordinated use of an ability or piece of gear can easily turn the battle in your favour. They'll play a huge part in whether you're successful, and choosing the right ones before a mission is arguably as important as using them smartly in it. The reliance of microing your abilities and equipment make the game feel so incredibly different from its predecessor. I'm not saying I don't like it, it's just different. You need a completely new mindset, the Sigma mindset, because Dawn of War 2 does not mess around. If you die, you are dead, game over, it's back to the start for you, and there's no saving mid-mission. Though I guess you don't technically lose your progress, because if you die, your squads are extracted, somehow, and you're taken back to the overworld, free to rearm, apply any experience points gained, and either try again, or shelve that mission for later and have another go when you and your squads are more competent. Now I'm really in two minds with my thoughts on this system. On the one hand, I love Iron Man modes. If I'm playing XCOM, it's on Iron Man 99% of the time. But here, it just feels really punishing, and to be frank, it's a real pain in the ass when you've slogged through 30 minutes of mission, regulating your equipment use and keeping your team alive, only to have your healer one-shot by some BS boss ability that you had no idea about. Or you've moved ahead too quickly and you've aggroed too many enemy squads who will just wreck you now because you had no idea that they were there around that corner. It's just a lot of trial and error, and it forces you to play really conservatively if you don't want to be replaying missions over and over. I found the most reliable way was to just move up and deal with squads of enemies one or two at a time, then move back to a reinforcement point, bring up any lost team members, rinse and repeat until the mission is over. Or there's a boss fight, with the latter basically being a coin flip whether you can beat it first try. The design for the bosses is for the most part really bland. Nearly all of them are just bullet sponges that can easily one-shot your squads if you're not careful, and if that does happen, you better hope it's not your team with the revive kit who gets downed, or you'll spend way too long kiting the boss around the arena with one squad while the other manually revives your downed teammates. Can you tell I really don't like the boss battles? Right, moving on. Zooming back out and looking at the campaign holistically, I think on its own, in a vacuum, it's great. The flow is fantastic, and the non-linear approach lends to the RPG-like mechanics to make it something you can really sink your teeth into and get involved with. All of the ways to approach missions, whether that's by when you choose to take them on, the squads you choose to bring, or the gear you equip them with, means you really can make it your own and tailor it to how you like to play. It has its negatives, everything does, and while in my mind it's not a great sequel to the campaigns of Dawn of War 1, thanks to it playing like a completely different game and being presented in a wholly different manner, most will be able to look past that and enjoy it for what it is. And aside from a couple of notable downsides, the presentation audio-visual wise is good, and the graphics for the most part are fantastic. It runs on an enhanced version of the Company of Heroes engine, so as expected, the effects are excellent and it really lends to the visceral feel that the game's going for. Blood is delivered in absolute buckets, as implied by the opening cinematic, and calling down artillery or detonating an explosive charge feels like it's vibrating the desk you're sitting at. That's to say that thankfully all the audio matches or beats the visuals, especially if you love hearing Space Marines yell at each other across the battlefield in between the firing of their bolters and ringing of their chainsaws.
Destroy them. Engage jump pads. Get it done. Move on.
The locations you'll be fighting in are quite varied, and at least anecdotally, seem a lot denser and more interesting than Dawn of War 1. There's a healthy mix of bleak cityscapes, expansive forests, and more, though unfortunately if the weather's involved you'll be struggling to see any of it. Like, look at this is some of the most obnoxious rain I've ever seen. There were times where I just restarted missions because the rain was so annoying. It's not quite at the level of the recent GTA remasters, but wow, it's close. Most of the time I can't even see where my cursor is. It's small enough on its own without this mess all over my screen. While the campaign is truly a great experience with interesting, addictive mechanics, freeform gameplay, and an intriguing but not overbearing narrative, single-player skirmish is the complete opposite. A repetitive, straightforward way to play that had me losing interest within just a few matches. The core elements of the campaign are still here, but without the angle of customization allowed by that mode's unique characters and Space Marine squads, there's just not a lot to it. Yes, you can train a variety of units that sport unique abilities and weapons, which you obviously can't do in the campaign, but aside from upgrading individual squads using resources, a la Dawn of War 1 and Company of Heroes, there's no ongoing customization. That's not an issue in of itself, other RTSs have done the same and not had any issues. The problems come when that's paired with the stale formula of capturing, losing, and recapturing way too many resource and victory points, as well as not having any base building to speak of. Oh capture points, tell me you're playing a Relic RTS without telling me you're playing a Relic RTS, am I right? At this point you might be thinking that this does sound a lot like Company of Heroes, but that game's skirmish mode is great, shouldn't this be the same? Well, no. While limited, Company of Heroes does have base building, plus the ability to construct defences, dig in across the map, effectively lock down choke points, and focus in on quite a unique playstyle, supported by the Commander and subsequent Doctrine systems. There's really nothing like that here. It's always the same selection of units for every faction, the same objectives, the same limited upgrades, and the same playstyle. Play fast or get out-resourced and overrun. Team play is better, but only because of the inherent benefits of working and playing with another human being. There are no tangible benefits aside from complementing each other's own weaknesses in gameplay. Look, if you want the best Dawn of War 2 has to offer, stick to the campaign. Leave the skirmish games to Dawn of War 1. I think you'll be happier for it. I certainly am. Dawn of War 2 did come with one more mode, however, added half a year after its initial release. It's called The Last Stand, and as the name hints at, it's a wave-based horde mode that you can play cooperatively with friends. It takes elements from the campaign, like the wargear system, and puts it into a digestible slice of co-op action. The Last Stand was built upon in the game's expansions, Chaos Rising and Retribution, and we'll talk a bit more about it when I cover those releases in separate videos. The modding scene for Dawn of War 2, unfortunately, isn't that expansive, which I guess is one way it's similar to its predecessor. While there are one or two notable ones made for its expansions, such as the Elite mod for Retribution, for the base game the main contender is probably Wrath of the Blood Ravens. It focuses on the campaign, adding a ton of new items, as well as making balance changes and expanding options for equipment loadouts. But there are some caveats, rules you'll need to abide by in order to keep the game from crashing and falling in on of itself like its Brittle Hollow from the Outer Wilds. I haven't completed a full campaign with it, so I can't say for certain whether the drawbacks outweigh what it has to offer, but from what I've read online, that may well be the ideal way to play, or at least a good option for a second run through. Let me know in the comments if you've played it and if you think it's worth it. As mentioned, Dawn of War 2 was expanded upon after its release with Chaos Rising in 2010 and Retribution in 2011, with the latter being completely standalone. They added a mix of new campaigns, factions, units, game modes and more, and they were very well received. Again, I'm going to be covering both of these expansions separately, as I don't want to spend 3 months on one video that includes everything. Plus, I think they add enough on their own to warrant some individual time in the spotlight. So if you're interested in seeing that, then hit subscribe and the bell, and you'll be notified once they go live. Following that, I'll of course be reviewing the ill-fated Dawn of War 3, to see where it all went wrong. You know, in a way, I'm kind of excited. I really know nothing about it, and I'm intrigued to see how it could be as bad as everyone says it is. I've limited myself to watching a few minutes of gameplay footage, and just based off of that I can't say I was very impressed, but I do want to do my utmost to come at it from an unbiased perspective. Maybe it's not actually that bad. Maybe it is. Either way, we'll find out soon enough. It's fair to say that nearly all of Relic's games have had an astounding longevity to them. Looking back throughout the entire catalogue, from Homeworld to Impossible Creatures to Dawn of War to Company of Heroes, everything plays and looks great to this day. It's a testament to their gameplay and visual design, and I'm glad that Dawn of War 2, being nearly 13 years old at this point, is no different. But I can see why there was and still is a crowd that looks down on it. Dawn of War 2 is a great game, but it's a bad sequel. The continuation of its predecessor's story is great, but the gameplay is completely different and it inhabits a nearly completely different genre, being more of a tactics game underneath a strategy-like surface. It's kind of like Supreme Commander 2. Great game, bad sequel. Dawn of War 2 really was a product of its time though, being released at a point where developers were trying to make RTS cool again by revamping mechanics and changing what it meant to be a strategy game. Whether it was World in Conflict, Tom Clancy's End War, Company of Heroes, Halo Wars, Men of War, Wargame, or War of Wars, all of them had a new idea of what an RTS could be, or should be for that matter. So I understand why Relic went this way, especially with the success they'd already found with Company of Heroes. And it is clear that in hindsight the decision was the right one, with the majority of critical reviews being very positive, as well as its sales numbers, expansions, and obvious sequel. If you're thinking of playing it today, I would absolutely recommend the campaign, 100% no doubt. While I personally don't think it's quite as good as the original Dawn of War, it remains a blast. There are some detractors to the experience, as there always are, but the positives significantly outweigh those. It's also a fantastic 40k game, arguably one of the best, with solid world building and an excellent representation of the source material. All I would say is that if you want a good skirmish match, stick to the first game. It's deeper, more varied, and an overall more rounded experience, especially with the expansions taken into account. Speaking of expansions, there is more to cover in the saga of Dawn of War 2. Separate videos on Chaos Rising and Retribution will be released soon, so subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss them. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to support me and what I do here, then like the video and consider supporting me via YouTube memberships or on Patreon. Links are in the description. You can join legends like T-Edits, Crispy Robo Chicken, Alan, David DeBolly, Overlord Jebus, Crizzy218, Dekayo, and Standby for Systems Nominal. Thanks again, thank you very much for the 25k, and I will see you all next time.